Hi, I'm Dr. Brandon Henry. Welcome to this presentation of my doctoral research, which studied what creates a vulnerability to pornography use, as well as the age of exposure. This presentation was presented as well in a longer format at the International Institute of Trauma and Addiction Professionals Symposium in 2024, and so glad to make it available to you. So today, the goal is we're going to hit 4 questions. My hope is that when you leave this presentation, you'll have a firm grasp on what research into ACEs or adverse childhood experiences offers us, how my research shows us the particular ways in which ACEs impact pornography use or consumption, as well as the age of exposure, and that you as a practitioner or an individual will know what's required in healing that. If ACEs create a vulnerability, then how do we treat those ACEs when we treat pornography use? So first question that we're going to answer today is just the history and importance of ACEs. These studies have been around for about 25 years and have studied an amazing amount of material, a lot of behaviors, different things like this. And so we're going to look at that, kind of overview the importance of those studies. Also going to look at how ACEs impact pornography consumption and age of exposure, which was my particular research for my PhD. How does this inform treatment? And what else do we need to answer? Any kind of good research always leads you to more questions than answers. And so if you're looking for something to research, I hope that I can provide you some easy questions to pursue. Not easy, but some questions to pursue. So let's start. What's the history and importance of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences? So just to give you the big picture history, this started back in the 1980s, 1990s with Dr. Felitti. He was on the West Coast, had a wellness center, and my understanding was working with a client in particular who suffered from morbid obesity. And this client came in to the wellness center, had really good success in the center, left, came back shortly thereafter, kind of in worse shape than when they started. And so this just got him being curious, which, again, I don't think I can overemphasize the importance of just staying curious. And so he stays curious. He starts asking questions. These questions lead in time to the 10 questions that we now have on the ACE study that we'll go over here in a bit. The original study started with 17,000 participants. It's a lot. So 17,000 participants. It looked at 10 different types of adverse childhood experiences. It started with 7, and again, this kind of refined over time. This didn't just happen all at once. This was over probably a decade or more time period of them kind of refining this, studying it, looking into the research. These 10 questions, though, asked about life issues, so physical, mental health, learning challenges, substance abuse, and it revealed 3 things to us. That children are exposed to a lot of trauma, which today we kind of take for granted that, yeah, duh, everybody knows that. It was not the case 25 years ago. This was groundbreaking. The way we understand trauma today, I don't think could be anywhere close to what it is were it not for this original study and all the studies that followed. Second is that trauma impacts social functioning, physical and mental health. Again, we sort of take for granted that everybody knows that. That's just not the case back then in particular. And then third, that the more trauma, the greater the impact, which again, seems obvious to us, but it was not. And so this study, man, I mean, it really kind of changed the way we understand people. Really understand. We're not just born a certain way with these proclivities towards substance abuse or negative behaviors or things like this, that we're created through our environment, that our environment creates vulnerabilities to many different things for us. Instead of just telling you about this, I want to show you a short clip from a TED Talk by Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. Part of why I show this is because she can say it more succinctly and better than I can. But also, if you've not watched this, if you've not studied her work, you need to do so. She's one of the experts in the field. So check this short clip out.
Well, of course, this makes sense. Some people looked at this data and they said, come on. You have a rough childhood, you're more likely to drink and smoke and do all these things that are going to ruin your health. This isn't science. This is just bad behavior. It turns out this is exactly where the science comes in. We now understand better than we ever have before how exposure to early adversity affects the developing brains and bodies of children. It affects areas like the nucleus accumbens, the pleasure and reward center of the brain that is implicated in substance dependence. It inhibits the prefrontal cortex, which is necessary for impulse control and executive function, a critical area for learning. And on MRI scans, we see measurable differences in the amygdala, the brain's fear response center. So there are real neurologic reasons why folks exposed to high doses of adversity are more likely to engage in high-risk behavior. And that's important to know. But it turns out that even if you don't engage in any high-risk behavior, you're still more likely to develop heart disease or cancer. The reason for this has to do with the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the brain's and body's stress response system that governs our fight or flight response. How does it work? Well, imagine you're walking in the forest and you see a bear. Immediately, your hypothalamus sends a signal to your pituitary, which sends a signal to your adrenal gland that says, release stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol. And so your heart starts to pound, your pupils dilate, your airways open up, and you are ready to either fight that bear or run from the bear. And that is wonderful if you're in a forest and there's a bear. But the problem is what happens when the bear comes home every night. And this system is activated over and over and over again. And it goes from being adaptive or life-saving to maladaptive or health-damaging. Children are especially sensitive to this repeated stress activation because their brains and bodies are just developing. High doses of adversity not only affect brain structure and function, they affect the developing immune system, developing hormonal systems, and even the way our DNA is read and transcribed.
Every time I watch that, I feel like I learned something new. Again, if you haven't watched that full video or read our book, please check it out. So what are these ACEs? What are these 10 questions? What do they look at? It's 3 areas: abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. And you can see here physical abuse, emotional abuse, and sexual abuse. One of the things that amazes me in terms of how ahead of its time, in at least in terms of kind of public opinion, was that they understood that emotional abuse, emotional neglect were profound, that they had massive impact on a person. And this is because they looked at the research. They stayed curious with the research to develop this. The common sense back then, when this came out in the 90s, was still that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. ACEs understand that's just not how it works. So again, this is looking at what's in your house. We know for sure, right? Traumatic things happen outside our homes. I think one reason why this focuses so much on the house, why it's held up over time, is because if I'm in a safe home, right, where these things are not present and I feel secure, right, and there's the secure attachment, there's safety. Let's take, for instance, if I'm at school and I get bullied, right? Somebody calls me a bad name, says something mean to me. If I have a safe home, secure home, I can come home and I tell my parents, hey, so-and-so said such and such. And my parents can soothe me. My parents can help me process that information, can speak truth to me. And, it's not necessarily traumatic. It's more, that's a bad day, that hurt my feelings. But you know what? I can heal. I can get over it. Take now, if a kid's growing up in a home where there's 4 or more of these, where they're not safe, where they don't feel secure. They go to school, they get bullied. Are they going to come home and talk to their parents about this? Probably not, they're going to hold it inside, right? They don't feel safe at home. Now they don't feel safe at school. It's creating that kind of chronic state of trauma that Dr. Harris just talked about. So these are the 10 things the ACE study looks at. If you want the actual assessment, it's free, it's online, it's public access. But it looks at these things. Was there mental illness or suicidality in the house? Did you have a relative that lived in your home who was incarcerated? Was your mother or grandmother treated violently? Was there substance abuse and separation or divorce? In that original study of 17,000 participants, again, about 70% of the people reported at least one ACE, right? So 70%. So about 30% reported zero ACEs. Around 50% reported 1 to 3, and then around a quarter reported 4 or more. So it kind of breaks down that way, right? About a quarter say 0, a quarter say 4 or more, and then 50% say 1 to 3. So it still relatively holds up. So we can think about it in those terms of none, low, or moderate, and high, right? Most studies, when they get to 4 or more, kind of clump them all the same. It seems that the impact is relatively the same if you've had 4 or more, which means you did not grow up in a safe home, did not grow up in a secure environment. So of these 10 things, right, that we just went through, quarter say 0, 50% say 1 to 3, quarter say 4 or more, how does that impact us? There are more studies on the ACEs than you can imagine. It felt like, in getting this research, there's a study on how do ACEs impact blank, right? Just fill in the blank, except for pornography use, which kind of was shocking. And so I'll tell you more about that story later, how I came to that. But it impacts our behavior, impacts our physical, mental health, impacts so many aspects of our lives, that the more you answer an affirmative, the more of those 10 questions you answer an affirmative. So the more ACEs that you have in childhood, 18 or under, the more vulnerable, right, you are to these different things. It's not saying that it's a 1-to-1. If this happens, then you're going to be a smoker or something else. It's saying that it creates a vulnerability to lots and lots of health problems, internal, external health problems. For instance, just a few of these. Just looking at this, you can see the gray is 4 plus ACEs. That kind of light lavender is 3, dark lavender 2, dark blue is 1. There's a big correlation in the more ACEs, the poorer your health, right? The more likely you are to smoke, the more likely you are to have obesity, depression, asthma, all of the above. Adult alcoholism, kind of same thing. You can see it here. I remember, so I'm an alcoholic in recovery, and I can remember when I was looking at the research on this, and that with the ACEs I had, I was 1,400% more likely to be an alcoholic than somebody with 0. That's a big gap, right? So we can't say you're just born with this, right? It's environmental, that it's developed, that the environment creates a... I'm trying to remember how Gabor Mate says it, that it's like DNA is the stone, but the environment is the chisel, right? And it creates kind of what comes out of it. And so same thing with alcoholism, same thing with suicidality. And then there's not a lot of studies on sexuality, how ACEs impact sexual behaviors. There are some. A lot of it has to do with pre-18, younger childs, or sexual offensive behaviors. And so you can see here that the more ACEs, the more vulnerable you are to intercourse at a younger age, teen pregnancy, and teen paternity. Just a few of the other studies that I looked at in my research. ANDA, that ANDA, if you want to, ANDA et al. Did a lot of studies on ACEs and sexual behaviors. And so that's where a lot of the stuff comes from with teen paternity, teen pregnancy. Bertolino there looked at risk behaviors, ACEs and risk behaviors. Dietz et al. Looked at unintended pregnancy and ACEs. Dillard et al. Looked at sexualized behaviors, trauma symptomology, and ACEs. Kind of list goes on. Drury. This was the only one that really looked at pornography use, but it looked at it in a paraphilic way, and so it was more sexually offensive use of pornography with those who are federal sex offenders. Grady, this is probably one of my articles that I enjoyed the most, that it made the most sense to me, and it looked at ACEs and attachment, particularly for sexual offensive behaviors, but ACEs and attachment. And I'm unabashedly, attachment was kind of the theory that so much of my research was based on, and it just makes more and more sense the more I look at this. That HILIS, ACEs and sexually transmitted disease, all of these are showing a strong relationship, statistically significant strong relationship between ACEs and whatever the thing is, right? Vanderin, ACEs and HIV, Zobrod, this is another good, really good article, sexual issues in treating trauma survivors. Some of these don't use ACEs in particular, but they use many of the kind of same things in childhood. So some other studies, addicts reporting traumatic childhood experiences. The research listed down there on the bottom. Some of this is old, but with substance abuse, 54% report traumatic childhood experiences. Gambling, 74%. Sexual addiction, 91%. Why is that? There's lots of good questions there that need to be answered. And so if you're looking to do research, there are some good ones there. If you're looking for further understanding of ACEs, right? If you want some books, some things to read, these are some incredible resources that are out there. There are more, clearly. These are some that I can tell you are fantastic resources. And so if you're looking for more. So bottom line, the more ACEs, the more vulnerable to certain negative behaviors or illnesses, or you kind of fill in the blank, honestly. So let's look now at my research in particular. How do ACEs create a vulnerability to pornography consumption? That was the word I used in the research. I'll use the word use here just because it's easier to use. And exposure. So pornography use and exposure. How do ACEs play into those two things? I want to tell you a little bit about just the journey of my research, hopefully to encourage you, hopefully to spur you on to answer your own questions you're interested in. So I started getting sober from pornography use back in 2011. I'd been exposed at a very, very early age, and had struggled with problematic pornography use throughout my life. Found sobriety in 2011. Unbeknownst to me, all the things that I talk about at the end of this in terms of what are needed for treatment were available to me at that time. And that's one of those, there before the grace of God. Like, I didn't know any better. I was not a counselor. I was starting to study counseling at the time, but nobody talked about any of this stuff with me. And so that led eventually in time. So I got my LPC and my LMFT, was practicing as a counselor, was working with a lot of people who had problematic pornography use in their life that wanted to figure out a way to deal with that in a healthy way. That eventually led me to understand I needed more training, that I was not equipped, just based on just a graduate degree, was not equipped to be working with problematic pornography use. It led me to pursue my CSAT, Certified Sexual Addiction Therapist, in 2017. And a lot of that training, that was some of the most rigorous training that I've done outside of my graduate studies, and it was on par with it. And so if you're a counselor looking for more training, more knowledge, this is the place. Look into becoming a CSAT. It was excellent. But a lot of what I was learning was a lot of validating and affirming kind of what I knew, right? What I had experienced. And so it started putting some pieces together. In 2018, I was invited to speak on the current state of pornography to the grad school that I went to. And so in preparing for that, I was looking at all kinds of stuff. One of the things I was looking at was ACEs impact on various things. Midway through the talk that I'm giving to folks, I just blurted out loud, I couldn't find any research on ACEs and pornography or pornography use. And that just kind of lodged in my brain. The questions kind of got stuck. And I thought, there's no way. Like, there's ACEs in everything, right? It seems like. There's got to be ACEs in pornography use, like understanding the correlation. So I looked and just never found anything. Eventually started my PhD studies in 2019, right as COVID kicked off. So that was terrible timing on my part. Made a hard thing even harder. But from the get-go, who eventually became my dissertation chair and mentor, just encouraged me, hey, focus everything you do, and I'd heard this from other students, all the studies you do, focus it on your research, on what you want to research later on. So go ahead and start accumulating articles, all this. And I kind of thought about a couple of things, but that question popped back up of, oh, wait a minute, what about ACEs and pornography use? And so pursued that and started doing the literature review, started gathering thousands of articles and reading through all this stuff and so on and so forth. And so it was really a 4-year journey of studying this, preparing for the research on it. And then in 2022 to 23, did the research, got the right amount of participants that I'm about to go through here in a second, and wrote it up and finished the dissertation. And so if you're curious about something, if you got that sort of that itch that you can't scratch, scratch it, right? Pursue it. We need more, particularly in our field of dealing with sexual addiction, sexual compulsive behaviors. We need more research. And so I would encourage you to pursue that if you can. So my research in particular, the way it came about, it was quantitative. I wanted to do my research in the same way that many other ACEs studies that I'd looked at had done. So I kind of set it up in the same way. It's correlational, cross-sectional. Again, that's typically what I'd come across when I was looking at ACE studies. It was based in attachment theory. I said that earlier. I am unabashedly, I'm all about attachment. It feels like so many issues that we humans struggle with are based on a lack of secure attachment. So just to qualify most everything that I say. I had 127 participants. It's needed 122 according to the research on kind of what the power needed to be. And so got 127. They received the ACE questionnaire, a demographic questionnaire, ACE questionnaire, and then PCQ, pornography consumption questionnaire. So there are a lot of different ways to look at pornography use and consumption. There are not very many that have been researched and show reliability and validity. And so the PCQ is one of the few that did. So I used a modified version of that with the original author, Dr. Hall's permission, and really tried to narrow it down to understanding when it started, when you were exposed, and then kind of what has consumption of pornography looked like kind of throughout your life. And so that's the PCQ is one of the few that had a lot of research behind it. And so I went with that. And then analyzed all this information through a multiple linear regression, and then came up with the results that I'm going to go through. So demographics on this, to be perfectly honest, a study like this would be great if it had more diversity. And so there was a little bit of diversity in this in terms of racial, ethnic diversity, marital status. It was mostly married people. The age was something I was impressed with. So the age range was 21 to 81, which was pretty neat to think about. I'm very curious about pornography use at those different ages, because you think about exposure in particular to pornography. If I'm 20, that means I grew up with the internet. If I'm 80, when I was a kid, the only thing maybe was, maybe there was a magazine around, but it's probably hard to access. And so I think there's a lot of neat research to be done there. Sexual identity, you can't see because my picture's in the way, but sexual identity was mostly straight married folks for the most part. There was some diversity there, but it would be really, really helpful for more research to be done with kind of different populations. So with those 127 people that I talked about, ACEs scores broke down like this. This is very similar to what you saw earlier in that early slide, talking about 25%, 50, 25, right? So it kind of broke down about normal. There was probably a little bit more in that mid-range, that 1 to 3. So in my study, there was about 40% in that mid-range. No. I say that wrong. No, there was 50%. And then in that 4+ range, there was a little less than the 25%. So, but it balanced out pretty evenly, pretty normal, which is good to see. Percentages of individual ACEs, so emotional abuse, you can see here The lowest was having a parent or somebody you grew up with that was incarcerated. Household abuse was pretty low, so that's kind of domestic abuse, looking at it that way. Divorce was pretty high, emotional neglect was pretty high, mental illness was pretty high, emotional abuse was pretty high. And so kind of more of the emotional impact was higher in this study than the other ACEs. What's that mean? I don't exactly know, right? So it's questions that lead to more questions. But it is interesting. I'll tell you later kind of which one of these stood out in terms of having a statistical significance with ACEs. Yeah, you can see it's unscathed. I guess the other thing about ACEs studies is that it's all self-reported, right? So there is a subjectivity to that. For the pornography definition, I wanted to go with one that had been research-based. So there's a lot of ways to understand pornography, there's a lot of diversity in understanding what is and what is not pornography, particularly now, right? So I tried to find one that was research-based. Ashton et al. In 2019 did a massive study and found this definition to be, in our digital age, to be appropriate. So based on the research, based on what's out there. So it's material deemed sexual, given the context, that has the primary intention of sexually arousing the consumer and is produced and distributed with the consent of all persons involved. So again, there's a lot of things that would not fit with that definition in terms of have you been exposed to pornography. But this is the one that's based in research, the one that I could find that was kind of held up the best in terms of research. Now, ages, this is exposure to pornography. Have you been exposed ever? 100%. So one of the flaws in this research is that there was nobody not exposed to pornography, which brings up an interesting question. Based on that definition, is there anybody that's not been exposed to pornography in the United States? It's an interesting question. It would be great to do an ACEs study and have participants in it who have not been exposed to pornography. Have you been exposed over the past year? 83%, past month, 67%, past week, 52%, past 24 hours, 22%. Average time spent consuming pornography in the last 6 months. 21% said never, all the way up to 7% saying more than 5 times a week. So again, you can see kind of that bell curve there, right? So 1 to 2 times a week is pretty consistent. Outside of that, never. Age of exposure. So I'd be curious, before I pull this up, what age do you think a majority of people state that they were exposed to pornography? So just kind of hold that number in your head. At least in mine, it was around the age of 12. So right around puberty, right? Or prepubescent age. There's a big difference in impact of being exposed to pornography prepubescent as in contrast to postpubescent. Another area that research could be really helpful to understand it. Another thing that, again, going back to what I said earlier of the ages of exposure, the 81-year-old in my study, I don't remember exactly the age in which they said they were exposed to pornography, but the difference between somebody that grew up, 2008, the smartphone comes out, the iPhone comes out. And so from 2008 on, pornography was always readily accessible on a handheld device. So people born that are 20 years old, right? So this is 2024 when I'm doing this. So people that were born in 2004, by the time they were 4, which is about the time that you would start noticing things and paying attention to stuff, they had instant access probably to pornography at all times, somewhere around them, right? Whereas that 81-year-old, that would not have been the case, right? Would not have been the case. So they were born in the 1940s. Centerfolds, Playboy, all that kind of stuff did not really start coming around and being readily available till the 60s. And so they were probably in their 20s before readily available pornography was accessible. So another really interesting area to research. The results of my study found statistical significance between ACEs, age of exposure to pornography, and pornography consumption in adult males. So what that means, the more ACEs somebody answers in the affirmative, the more vulnerable they are to using pornography, to consuming pornography in adulthood. And again, this is just looking at males. And the more ACEs they answer in the affirmative, the more vulnerable they are to being exposed to pornography at a younger age. So both of those things showed statistical significance. So ACEs have a direct impact on our exposure to and consumption of pornography, which is something that I knew, right? And here I was like, that's got to be right. But I couldn't say it really until the research showed it and held it up. And so, yeah, this was an exciting, sad find. Something I had seen with my clients over and over again, and knew it anecdotally, but now have the research to show it. I'm not going to go through the nitty gritty of this research. If you want to see it, it's on the website. The full dissertation's on there. Working to get this published in a peer-reviewed journal, so that's hopefully going to be on soon. So of those 10 ACEs, which do you think had the strongest relationship to pornography consumption in adulthood? So thinking again, abuse, neglect, household dysfunction. Was it abuse? Physical, emotional, or sexual? Was it neglect? Physical or emotional or household dysfunction? Mental illness, incarcerated relative, mother treated violently, substance abuse, or divorce? So in my research of those 127 participants, the strongest correlation between pornography consumption and a particular age was that of divorce or separation, which again, as somebody who's unabashedly all about the attachment stuff, this makes sense. That there was a break in secure attachment, which created a higher vulnerability to pornography use and consumption. Again, there are more questions and answers that come up with that, but man, that feels very, very significant. So how does this inform treatment? I'm talking mostly here to clinicians, but if you're a person who is struggling with pornography consumption, I think I'll try to speak this in language that's not too clinical, hopefully. All right. If adverse childhood experiences create a vulnerability to pornography use, as my research showed that it does, then treatment must be concerned with adverse childhood experiences. What do I mean by that? So the simple, easy way that I break this down is to think of it in these three terms. ACEs show us a lack of secure attachment, right? So in my home life, if the more I answer in the affirmative, the less secure the attachment, right? ACEs show us emotional dysregulation or stress, right? So on one hand, there was high stress levels in my house, and on the other hand, probably nobody showed me how to deal with it, right? And then third, that there's this unhealed pain and trauma, right? From witnessing violence in my home, witnessing and experiencing violence towards myself, either emotional or physical. And so these kind of three areas, right? You can think about all 10 ACEs kind of fit right in the middle of that. So if these three things, if ACEs impact my vulnerability to pornography use, then if I'm trying to heal from or deal with unwanted or problematic pornography use, I must deal with these three areas. So how do I do that? Say it this way. So treatment of ACEs must include the following. Secure relationships. With my clients, I always tell them, you got to get in some group where you feel safe. I genuinely don't care what the group is. It could be a 12-step group. That's great. 12-step groups were extremely helpful for me. It could be a church group if you feel safe there. Could be 4-H, could be Boy Scouts. I don't care. You've just got to be in a group where you feel safe and secure in those relationships, right? It's got to be done one way or another. That doesn't mean it has to be IOP that you got to go off. Sometimes that's helpful, but it's not always necessary. And then secondly, you got to learn to emotionally regulate. I'm here in the South. I call it Southern male syndrome, that not only were we taught to not deal with our emotions, but we were taught actively to suppress them and put them away. And so that did not lead to good things. And so we got to learn how to regulate those emotions better. And then third, we got to heal that trauma, right? And that's not, unfortunately, you can't just talk your way through trauma. You got to do something with it. We know that it's held in our bodies, in our nervous system, so we got to do something with it. So if pornography is about regulating emotions, feeling connected, and dealing with pain, which I think there needs to be more research on that, for sure. But kind of what's the point of pornography? What's it doing for us? That sort of thing. But I think it's fair to say that it helps regulate our emotions, helps us feel connected, at least in the chemicals that are released in our body, and it helps us deal with pain, right? It helps us numb out. Then the solution is finding new ways to regulate emotions, new ways to feel connected, and proper, healthier ways to heal pain. So I want to think about, I'm going to look now more at the CSAT kind of training. So in the CSAT, Certified Sexual Addiction Therapist, again, in our model of recovery that's based on the work of Patrick Carnes, there are 30 tasks, right? Of these 30 tasks, part of what I wanted to do was break these down generally into those 3 areas. Are we doing these things? So you think about with emotional regulation. That really is on the front end of those 30 tasks, right? That we're working through emotions, that we're learning how to hold space for these different emotions. We're learning how to manage them, how to regulate them. How do we heal from trauma? I would say within the 30 tasks, this is probably the least addressed area, right? It's there. We're working with the body. We're working with shame, how we stay stuck in cycles of abuse. But I would say more should be done. More probably needs to be done. And then finally, secure relationships. This is really kind of on the back end. So it's interesting to me how this fits up with beginning, middle, and end. We know, right, for a fact that in recovery work that if I leave an insecure, chaotic kind of state and I go get help, but then I come right back to that same insecure relationships with all the chaos and everything else, I'm going to slip right back in. Why is that? It's because the pornography in this case is not the problem, it's the solution, as we say of so many addictions, right? I always say it's just a solution that causes lots and lots of problems. And so we got to find a better solution. And so if I'm going to work with a client, I want to hit all 3 of these areas. I'm helping you learn to regulate emotions, helping you heal from your trauma. There's many different ways to do that. And I'm helping you establish and learn how, maybe with me, you're practicing secure relationships in this office, but I want you in a group where you're actively learning how to have and maintain secure relationships. So last question I want to answer is, what else do we need to answer? There are lots, recommendations for further study. So if you're in this field, or you're looking at doing a dissertation, or you're just really good at that kind of stuff, here's some questions that I would encourage you to try to answer. One of the things I ran across was, is pornography even a sexual behavior? There's a lot of different understanding of what is exactly pornography. Not only are there many, many different definitions of it, but there are many understandings of kind of what's it doing. Is it positive? Is it negative impact on us? Is it sexual? Is it just coping? What is it? Another one would be a similar study in mind, looking at consumption of pornography by females. But kind of, as I said earlier, it'd be really great to look at different areas of demographics and how it impacts people that have different sexual identities, people of different gender, people of different race, people of different relationship status, and so on and so forth. So some more diversity with this same type of study. Similar study of ACEs, pornography, with those that have not been exposed to pornography. I'm very curious if you can find those people in our day and age. And then development of more scales to assess pornography consumption. Sorry for that misspelling there. Dr. Hald he's got a new version of that PCQ that's out. But there needs to be more. Usually those are focused on pornography consumption and then some sort of impact that it's looking at. It would be really helpful just to have a scale of just pornography consumption that's got the research done on validity and reliability. I just had a difficult time finding those. And then finally, I would be very curious. This is a big question. It's probably the main question that came up in this research. So thinking about this, ACEs, which are these traumatic things that happen in our childhood, have a direct correlation to vulnerability to exposure to pornography at a younger age. I am very curious to understand how exposure at a young age and younger ages is in itself abuse or traumatic, right? One way, this is from Gail Dines, who did a TED Talk on this. She said it this way: we need to understand boys as victims of this predatory industry. Boys who are exposed to mainstream online violent pornography are increasingly being traumatized by the cruel images that assault them when they put porn into a Google search. Research shows that an adolescent brain is primed for novelty and risk-taking, and the pornography industry has hijacked this developmental stage by targeting boys as potential consumers. Studies reveal that the more young people are exposed to porn, the harder it is for them to form intimate relationships as they move through adolescence and into adulthood. So there needs to be more awareness made, not only on the impact that pornography has on females, as those being, again, we know much of the pornography that's online is not consensual. We know that it often shows females in a derogatory or degraded way. We know that it shows some form of violence against females as normative. So we know the impact that it has on females, but we need to do a better job of publicizing that and teaching about that. I don't think, on the other hand, there's enough discussion of how it impacts the boys who are the targets of, and I love how she says it, this predatory industry. It's not only predatory towards females, but also males as the consumers. And we know it's poisoning to those males, I think, in particular at a younger age. And so you think about this, exposure to pornography often, particularly at a younger age, prepubescent, when we don't have the verbal acumen to be able to describe what's going on, it leads to silence. Maybe I see it, I don't even know what to describe it is that I saw. Most of the people that I work with, if they were exposed to pornography, or if they're younger, they may just say something like, "It was something, I saw something weird," right? They don't have the verbal abilities, and so usually leads to silence, leads to shame. For instance, if let's say there's an 8-year-old boy at a park, and he's playing on a swing set, and a 45-year-old man in a trench coat, which is what we typically like have in our minds, comes up to that boy with a cell phone, pulls it out, pulls up pornography, shows that kid, that young boy, that prepubescent boy, an image, a pornographic image, right? But the mom sees, and the mom calls the cops, and the cops come and arrest that guy because why? Because that's sexual abuse of a minor, right? That's not okay. That's offensive behavior. Same boy in the same park, but now he's got his mom's phone, and she's talking to friends. And he overheard some kids at school say the word porn. Well, that's a funny sounding word. And they seemed excited about it, so I want to look it up. So he types in porn. Boom, same image shows up. Whose fault is this, right? That's part of the problem, right? Is now the shame is sort of ingested. It's like, maybe this doesn't feel right. This behavior that otherwise would be sexually offensive behavior now, is it my fault? Whose fault is it? I don't understand. Especially as a kid, the younger age, the brain's not primed to understand what's going on, which leads then to holding these secrets. These three are characteristic of abuse, right? Silence, shame, and secrets. And so I really want somebody to do some research on age of exposure to pornography and to what degree it is harmful, if it's harmful, and then to what degree it is harmful. If you want more information, again, this was as quick an overview as I could do. If you go to this page, redrivercounseling.net/presentations, on here you'll find this. You'll find the slideshow. You'll find a lot of other documentation. You'll also find a link to the dissertation itself, as well, which goes through the nitty-gritty, as well as hopefully one day when this gets published in a peer-reviewed journal, you'll find that on there as well. So thanks for joining me. Thanks for listening to this not so brief overview of this topic. So thanks.